Next up, we have Ed Ainscoe. Ed is the Managing Director of Lunnon Metals, and he's back presenting after a bit of a hiatus at Diggers. Ed is a geologist, and you can read about that on his website bio. But what many don't know is Ed and his wife have had 4 children in 4 different countries, while Ed was working in 4 different commodities. So in 1990, his first son was born in Zambia, while Ed was working in the copper space. In 92, he had a son in Cornwall while he was in tin. 94, a daughter in New Zealand while you were in gold, Ed. And in 98, you had a son down the road here in Cambalda while you were working in nickel. So you're a truly worldly geologist.
Thank you very much. If I wasn't feeling tired after 3 days at Diggers, that introduction has just made me really feel my age. And just a quick side story, when I sent that quirky fact through to Paul, he came back to me and he said, just to avoid embarrassment, was it all with the same woman? Whew. So the presentation's on the website. Do read the disclaimer at your leisure. And another throwback, Paul asked for a couple of quirky facts. He mentioned it's a long time since I first presented at Diggers. It's actually 2 decades. And then 2 decades ago, I was standing here presenting for Goldfields for their very first presentation after the acquisition of the St Ives and Agnew gold operations. I was the lucky person they asked to do the long haul. John Munro sitting there on the left of the image, to the left of Kerry Hermanus, to the right of Kerry Hermanus, did a short intro, and then I stood up and I presented about St Ives down the road at Cambalda. Essentially, some of those leases that I presented on are the same leases I'll be telling you about today. So the same speaker, same leases, different commodity, different company, and a little bit less hair and a lot greyer. So that's not just a self-indulgent throwback in terms of that picture. It's actually, in essence, the start of the story I want to tell you over the next 15 minutes. So while this is Lunnon Metals' first presentation, as I said, it wasn't my first, and I was presenting on the back of that transaction. And back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, at the same time, WMC was selling its nickel mines to the likes of Independence, Panoramic, and Mincor. And we all know how successful those companies went on to be with those assets they acquired. They were also selling their gold business to Goldfields. So I got sold with the furniture. I was the last chief geologist for WMC at Cambalda St Ives, first chief geologist therefore for Goldfields. But at the same time as they took on that asset and took on a great team out at Cambalda, there were 4 nickel mines that had already shut down prior to WMC's strategic exit of its nickel ownership. And those 4 mines got sold with the gold. So those 4 mines went to Goldfields. Goldfields obviously very focused on gold and significantly ramped up their exploration budget. And those assets essentially lay fallow for the next 15 to 20 years until we joint ventured them privately, heading into the IPO back in 2015. So they missed the last boom. Our value proposition when we listed last year in 2021 was very much to replicate the success of the 3 junior companies as they were, who bought those assets from WMC, and to grow our resource base, which at the time of the IPO was 39,000 tonnes of nickel metal and has grown. So locality map, we have 2 projects. One is about to settle at the north side of Lake Lefroy in the middle of Cambalda. Our current project around the Foster and Jan nickel mines is on the south side of Lake Lefroy, and that will be the subject of the talk today, and I'll give you an update on the acquisition slightly later. And we've had a very busy 12 months, especially busy last 6 months. We've made a discovery. And we first reported those grades in January and February. We raised $30 million. We're very fortunate on the back of that success and the momentum with the Baker discovery to raise $30 million with Euros Hartleys and Argonaut, and we thank them for their support. And on the back of that success, we also agreed with Goldfields to do another acquisition, that project to the north, and I'll update you in that shortly. And we pushed hard with Baker. It was a great success, but we got it into a resource in June before the anniversary of our first of listing, and within 9 months of discovery. So I want to focus on Baker, but before I do, just why were those companies successful, and why is this such a good opportunity? The geology and the aspects of the nickel ore bodies in Cambalda, they're just unique. They have this amazingly long raking plunge of these channels. Very small footprint, very hard to drill from surface. WMC would drill enough and go underground, but then forever and a day be hard up and close to that ore body and exploring with the underground drill rig and the jumbo. So they left a lot of nickel metal. 450,000 nickel tonnes was found by those acquiring companies and produced post the sale by WMC. Our 4 assets in total produced 253,000 nickel tonnes prior to their shut. They were shut 5 to 10 years before that strategic exit by WMC, and then, as I say, lay fallow for another 15 to 20 years. So that's the quantum we see as the opportunity to take a second bubble on that chart and have a much larger second bubble as the other 3 companies did. So we're going to zoom in on Baker. Well, this is Foster Jan. That's an isometric view of the geology of our project on the south side of Lake Lefroy. We've stripped away the ultramafic, so you're looking at the very important Kambalda basalt contact, Lunnon basalt contact. All the nickel that's ever been found and mined in Kambalda and Widgiemalta, 1.6 million tonnes, essentially sits at or close to that contact. On the left of the image, we've got about 50,000 nickel tonnes that's accessible from the Foster mine, but on the right, and Baker, up in that northeast corner of the project, I'd like to take you through a few slides about how we found Baker, what it means to us, how it looks, and what we're thinking. And just keep an eye on that open pit, just up there, on that image, as I zoom in on Baker itself. That is the crest of that pit there. And that's important because that's a potential future portal site. But this plan image shows what it looked like to us when we IPO'd. WMC drilled Baker. It was called East Kui hanging wall. They drilled it in the early 1970s. They were targeting nickel on the contact. They didn't really get any. That one hole that's flagged there, half a metre at 1.7%, was the only nickel they really hit on the contact. So they walked away. But that drill spacing, about 100 square metres, had actually intersected some low, modest nickel grade in the hanging wall, about 30 metres above the contact, enough information for us to have an exploration target in our prospectus, which is that dashed outline. So we're going to step through the progression of drilling. This was our first pass out of the IPO. We ourselves were a bit underwhelmed by our first pass drilling through there, but there was a metre at 7.4% of massive, which we hadn't seen in the logs of the WMC drilling. We did downhole EM. We got a very high conductance plate. Around that hole, there was nickel at the point in the plate, but it was a very strange angle. It was across the stratigraphy, and the nickel in Kambalda should be parallel to the stratigraphy. We didn't really understand it. Like a lot of the junior companies back then, we were waiting 12, 14 weeks for our assays, and Aaron Will, the exploration manager, and myself looked at each other and said, well, we've just got to get back in there. There's only so many targets we can drill in the top 300 metres, and this is one of them. So we went hard. We decided to throw a few punches and see how many we could land. We drilled it out to 40 by 40, basically, in between the WMC drilling, and lo and behold, as we stepped that spacing in, we started to hit results, as you see on there, 7 at 9, 10 at 6, much higher tenor mineralisation, lots more massive in the drill holes. We drilled that in November, December. We published the results in January, February, March, and then April through May, we put together a geological model. So those shapes are representing a channel at the base of the second flow, about 30 to 40 metres above the nickel contact. We're also getting nickel on shears that's remobilising nickel from somewhere that we haven't found yet. And when we've run the widget, when we've run the floating stope, the algorithms over this resource model to see whether it could or couldn't be prospectively mined, no surprise, it all wants to get mined. So we've made the decision, we've stepped back in and we're drilling this 20 by 20 now, stepping in again, and lo and behold, every time we step in, we just start seeing better thicknesses and better grades. And we put the 23 at 6.78 out a couple of weeks ago, and we put 19 at 6% out yesterday, and the share price went down. So I think they're probably expecting 23 metres every single time. So that's how it looks in plan view. Just of note here, look at the original black dots from WMC. You'll see the traces of those holes. Actually, just with the depth of the hole and the way the orientation went, they've actually ended up WMC drilling exactly either side of that channel. And make no doubt, if they'd drilled 23 metres at 6.8% back in 1970, they would have drilled this out, they would have mined it, and it wouldn't still be there today. So we'll look at this cross-section. This is pretty well a tight cross-section for the deposit. You're looking to the north, west to the left of the page. Those are those two drill holes. When we got the 23 at 6.78, it's actually made up of two intersections, broadly 14 at 8, and about another 7 at 6, with 2 metres of waste in the middle. We obviously thought, oh my God, what are we going to do with these results? And we decided to double-check the geology down the RC hole, and we did an optical tele view down the hole. That's an image of the borehole wall wrapped around to make it look like core. It isn't core. But what that did, it gave us great confidence. The geology is very clear. The contacts of the nickel mineralisation are very sharp, and they reconcile very exactly with the RC grades. And obviously, it really nicely highlights the last 5 metres at the base of that first flow, all running in 13, 14%. So fantastic result. Aaron World, the exploration manager, as I said, has always postulated that there was another structure over here, and part of this drilling and the 19 at 6% seems to show that we've got two very high-grade shoots raking across that low-grade or low to modest-grade hanging wall surface that WMC walked away from. So happy days, and for those in the auditorium, to give you some context, that is the auditorium. When I was preparing the presentation, I went through lots of Kalgoorlie websites looking for things that were 23 metres big or long or high. There weren't many, everything was too big. But then when I looked at the Art Centre website, the distance from the front of the stage to the bio box at the back there where the technician sits is actually 24 metres. So I thought that's pretty close. So just imagine 23 metres of mineralisation. Unfortunately, for those of you in J and K, you are that 2 metres of internal waste, I'm afraid. So that's Baker. Obviously, with those grades, those widths, it's really looming large in our plans. The widths are better, the grades are better, and as a result, then the SG is better. So we end up getting like a 3 times compounding effect. They are drilled in the resource, but they will grow the resource locally in those areas, in those very high-grade shoots. But we haven't forgotten about Foster. As I said, we've got about 50,000 nickel tonnes at the Foster nickel mine. It's flooded to surface, but all those tonnes are accessible directly from the old workings. We're pushing ahead with the permitting. We're getting great support from Goldfields, our major shareholder, but they're also an operational partner at St Ives, a very important relationship because our tenements are essentially surrounded by St Ives, so we thank Goldfields for their support, both at site and corporately. And we're pushing ahead to get the groundwater licence and the prescribed premises permits in place so that we can actually dewater Foster, get back down the decline, start looking at the state of the decline and developing some underground platforms so we can drill those ore bodies up a little bit more closely and more directly. And as we've seen with the performance of other assets in the Kambalda district, once you get down there and you get close, the ability to do downhole EM from underground and to just incrementally grow those ore bodies is kind of second to none for nickel fields. So we haven't forgotten about Foster. It's a big part of our plans too. Quick update on the acquisition with Goldfields. It was subject to a number of conditions precedent. They've all now been met. The independent experts report that was required, because obviously Goldfields, as I said, is a major shareholder, is complete, and that's close to finalisation, and we'll be putting out a notice of meeting to shareholders and hopefully hold that in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So that should settle hopefully this quarter, letting us get on the ground in the December quarter. It's exactly the same value proposition. These two mines, Fisher and Silver Lake, produced 160,000 nickel tonnes. They were shut even earlier than Foster over on the south side of the lake. And just in that table, there's a little example of the uplift. Remembering these mines shut before WMC, so they missed out on 10 to 15 years of WMC exploration. And at the point of sale for the rest of the dome, there was 763,000 nickel tonnes had been mined. It's calculated out on a linear metre. Present day, that's gone up to a million tonnes of nickel metal. So a 40% uplift in an area that was actively explored and being mined from continuously, and our assets missed out not only on 10 to 15 years of WMC exploration, a subsequent 15 to 20 years of exploration by those 3 juniors. So we're very excited. We're particularly interested in the strike extent of the Long Victor McLeod Moran channels. We're pretty confident they come onto the ground at Silver Lake, where Silver Lake's labelled on that image. And as I say, we'll get in, we'll be cutting old core, we'll be drilling historical remnants, and we'll be doing some seismic surveys looking to pick up those channels as strong reflectors where they run onto our ground. Quick corporate overview, a couple of things I want to pull out there. I was a bit lazy. The share price was $1 on Friday, and that made the maths really easy. So I left it at $1. We're not there today. We've had Deborah Lord join the board, so really pleased to have her on the team. She's been fantastic. We've also just recruited Helen Anderson, who's a 25-year plus veteran of the safety, health, environment space. She knows Kambalda. She's worked there for Goldfields. She also previously worked for WMC, so she knows the site. Maybe more importantly, joining us, she knows us, and she's worked with us before, and she'll be fantastic in helping us move from being a pure explorer to a potential developer and a potential miner in the future. On the corporate structure, just for reference, the shares on issue will go to 195 million once the Goldfields deal settles. So just keep in mind that dilution is yet to happen, and as I said, will happen in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We are covered by Euroz Hartley's, Argonaut and Foster over in Sydney. They've got a range of different prices. I really like the Euroz Hartley's price myself. So look, wrapping up, it's a great time to be in nickel. Dale just said what a great time to lithium, but it is a good time to be in nickel too. The energy transition has turned into a bit of an energy crisis that's taken people's eyes off maybe the longer goal, but it's still there. The thematic for nickel is very strong, and we're an aggressive explorer, making discoveries and growing our resource base. Kambalda's a fantastic place to be. I mean, it's got such a long, rich history of mining, the power, the infrastructure, the workforce. Our relationship with Goldfields at site is exceptional, and obviously, most importantly, from a capital point of view, very little capital required in terms of processing, with the Kambalda West concentrator close by. And again, Kambalda, it's an unrivaled nickel camp. The assets have just this unbelievable ability to keep on keeping on. We see Baker as validation of that characteristic, and we're excited not only to explore the rest of Foster Jam, but also the new assets when that deal settles. So we think we're primed to capitalise on what looks like a very attractive time for the nickel space. So thank you. We're a small company. We've grown very quickly on the back of a lot of success and tried to take that momentum forward with the capital raising in April. It's a very historical area, but we think it's time to start making our own history and contributing to Kambalda. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ed. We're out of time, so we won't have any questions. But I know Ed is hanging around for this evening, so if you have any questions for Ed, you'll see him around.
And our booth is still open because it's in the external area.
Perfect.
Thanks
Great.
very much.
Thank you, Ed.